So this
Yeah.
is from the Tennessee Conservative. Governor Bill Lee signed 2 bills into law last Thursday that will protect children in Tennessee. House Bill 001, Senate Bill 001 prohibits gender affirming care for minors who identify as trans, and House Bill 09, Senate Bill 03 makes it an offense for drag performers to provide sexually provocative entertainment in the presence of children under 18. Lambda Legal was quick to announce that they will sue the state over the new law that will halt gender affirming care by next year. And just so we're clear, gender affirming care is in quotations here. The law is set to go into effect on July 1st, 2023. Minors currently receiving puberty blockers or hormones opposite of their gender at birth will lose access to such care after March 31st, 2024. Lambda Legal is joined by the American Civil Liberties Union and the ACLU of Tennessee in opposing the new law. The law also provides a legal basis for patients who feel they were injured as a result of gender affirming treatments to sue parents or guardians and the medical physicians who provided treatment. The law banning sexually obscene drag performances will take effect April 1st, 2023, a month ahead of Pride Month in June. So that's some updates on the Tennessee legislation that we've been following periodically throughout this channel. So, Michael, what's your initial thoughts on those new bans being put in place?
It's unfortunate that this is considered good news. That's kind of my take on it, is that our society is so fallen that that's a necessary measure that needs to be taken. Because it's not as easy as like, wow, a win for Christian conservative people, like whatever. That's not really a win. It's like mitigating damages. And what's unfortunate about it is that I think that there's going to be more damages that take place as a result. And the damage now, like they're talking about taking hormone blockers away from young people who are currently on that already, which means they're going to be denied the transition that they have already engaged in and in their minds have already fully accepted. But now they're not going to be able to affirm that bodily. And I'm not saying that they should be able to affirm that bodily. I'm saying that I foresee a greater amount of opposition to these bans that will probably have a harsher lashback than what we're doing even now. So I don't know. Maybe I'm pessimistic. What do you think?
So do you mean it like you think that people who already have begun transition are going to be so upset about the fact that they basically no longer can transition that you're going to see more people throwing fits about that than
kind
maybe
of
otherwise?
like they're, and I'm going to sound a little bit harsh in the way that I say this, but at the risk of sounding harsh, they're the product of a generation that embraces a victimhood mentality, and they're being dished up a case of victimhood where they can stand on that and show it to the world to see how horrible the oppression of people who reject transgenderism are. And I'm worried that for the people in the middle or the people who are sympathetic toward or accepting of transgenderism, it will be a much more convincing measurement or a more convincing cause against conservative values than just the truth of what a conservative would promote. Or even if not a conservative, I don't necessarily mean politically conservative, but ethically conservative, to say that we have our reasons for believing the way we believe. We believe that there are implications for health that are being disregarded. But people usually go towards the shiny thing that's right in front of them, and the shiny thing may end up being some poor teenagers who's halfway one gender and halfway the other because they've been on hormone blockers, and now they're just a mess and can't be one direction or the other. And they're going to blame the government or blame conservatives for making that their situation. So I don't know. That's maybe the potential that I see. Do you think I'm out of line in thinking that?
Oh no, I think that you're completely right in regards to that's definitely going to be the narrative on the opposing side, 100%. Um, I think what it honestly boils down to is willpower. Um, because like in the state of Tennessee, for example, overwhelmingly, I mean, even in our country, speaking broadly, including all the Democratic counties, the Republican counties, and what we would call swing counties, overwhelmingly, most people disagree with just gender transition surgeries, at least for minors. I mean, honestly, I think most people, I think it's like 58% disagree in general with them, period, regardless of age. But for minors, that number goes up. And so to some degree in the state of Tennessee, those numbers go up exponentially as well because we're a much more conservative state than say California or New York. And so ultimately, I think it's going to be a matter of willpower. I think that there's going to be a loud minority. And
Yeah.
this is something that happens, especially left wing political movements. They will ship in people from out of states to go and into Tennessee to make a big stink because, to be honest, they kind of want to make an example of Tennessee. So it's
Yeah.
just going to be a matter of willpower for the Republican leadership in the state to not cave to that, and even the culture to not cave to that, because what you're saying is correct.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of will people cave to that.
And we know the bias of the media is not in our favor. So
Yep.
that's
Even
why we're here speaking
right, and
for truth.
exactly, because even in Tennessee, there are very, very few conservative outlets. In fact, that's why, if for those who have been watching the show, whenever I do mention Tennessee, I'm always quoting from the Tennessee Conservative because, to be honest, they're kind of the only statewide newspaper that covers things from a more conservative perspective. Everything else is at best independent, but I honestly don't think there's really much independent voices outside of, alternative media in the state of Tennessee, despite it being one of the most Republican states in the entire union. It's just there's just some weird aversion that people who have more conservative principles have of like not wanting to get into media, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because it's so ugly. Honestly, it's an ugly job, but that is why we're we're doing this when we bring up Tennessee is just try to fill in the gap a little bit. Not that we're necessarily a news outlet, but we are trying to bring news stories into the public eye and trying to talk through those. But now that being said, I do think that you're correct about you're correct about how the alternative narrative is going to form. I think that you're spot on. I think it's just a matter of everyday people need to be more aware of what's going on with the perverse ideologies of gender affirming care and transgenderism and drag queen story hour, things like that. And that kind of brings us to our next story. I am going to check the chat really quick though, in case I'm missing anything.
Yeah, Richard put up a good comment. He says
go ahead
many
and read that out.
people, yeah, many people who don't have any real conviction to stand on, much less any biblical Christianity, see their virtue as standing with the victim, which is why we see people doing this with the LGBTQ stuff. I've added the Q, but I don't even know what the relevance of that is. Yeah, so what Richard is saying is that when people don't have a moral compass of their own, then it's easy to see someone who's being victimized and say, well, that's not just, and stand on their own little pedestal next to those people. And I think that's why the media is allowed to be as effective as it is because there's so many people who are either uneducated or don't have ethical convictions about these issues. So they default to, oh, well, they're not being treated well, therefore it must be wrong. But, there's more to justice than happiness.
Yeah. And Richard, you'll definitely have to stick around in the chat because there's a story a little bit later on that we're going to cover that I think is really I'd love you to send in some chats for that one. But yeah, I mean, kind of like what I was beginning to say a moment ago, the I think the average individual, and this is something that you and I even talked about today while setting up this stream and planning for the episode. I think that the average individual in Christian America, in the greater Christian community, they try to be either apolitical or they just aren't paying attention whether they're actively choosing to be apolitical or not. They oftentimes don't understand how bad things are getting in some of these areas of gender ideology. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring attention to this next story, because this is something that just happened recently. I believe it was over the weekend. So this is from the Post Millennial. A London entertainment company that puts on events for parents and babies featuring scantily clad drag performers dancing provocatively has become the focus of intense international outrage. The social media storm began when broadcaster Dominic Samuels shared video footage of a Kaba Baba rave event in which adult men wearing little more than thongs can be seen cavorting and gyrating in front of an audience made up of adults and infant children. One of the men is wearing tight black shorts and thigh-high stiletto boots while he twirls on aerial ropes. Another, wearing just a thong and high heels, performs an impressive balancing act upside down on a chair, leaving little to the imagination. This is a quote here. We wanted to create the type of event we ourselves as mums would want to go to. There's only so many times you can listen to the effing wheels on the bus. We wanted to give parents the experience of a big London night out, cabaret, drinks, and dancing, but one you can bring your baby to and sit still. And still be home for bedtime, they explain. The events are aimed at parents and babies under 2. Skipping down a bit here. All the company's social media accounts are now set to private after the video clips were a storm of outrage. And skipping down a little bit more, one photograph of Kaba Baba Rave's now private Instagram shows a drag queen doing the splits with a crowd of mother and baby onlookers. Another post shows a screenshot of a message criticizing the inappropriate form of baby entertainment. Quote, wearing latex and drinking pints is not suitable for a baby event. Shameful, reads the message. Yay, shame. Best review ever is the accompanying caption. And then another response to that also said, the parents that take their children to events like this should lose custody of their children, and the companies and people that put them on should be locked up. Absolutely revolting. And that was tweeted by Gays Against Groomers, which is a group of LGBTQ individuals who are absolutely not okay with the targeting of children. But I know there's a lot to respond there, but what were your initial thoughts, Michael?
Well, Shara Joel says, "Oh my goodness, good thing those babies aren't going to remember that garbage," in the chat. And on one hand, true. However, they're being raised by parents that see this as not just acceptable conduct, but desirable conduct. And that it's to be compared to going a night out on the town, but when you can go to bed by bedtime. That's the justification for advertising this specifically to mothers or parents of young children. Now, sure, you can say you don't remember what takes place at 2 years or younger, but there are patterns that form behavior, and behavior that form emotional maturity and emotional development that will impact the behavior of those children throughout their lives. And they are shaping the conduct that they are deeming as acceptable or as ordinary. And my heart breaks for a parent who can so selfishly say, it's more important for me to get what I want from this display of sexual conduct than it is for my child to be raised outside of a sexual context. Like what they're saying is that my desire for this is more important than my child's understanding of a healthy sexual or a healthy relationship with sexual things. So they're normalizing overly sexualized behavior. And this has nothing to do with it being men dressed as women or whatever. It's purely sexual content. And I don't care if it's, a strip club or a drag show or just straight up hookers. It's kind of all in the same category of over sexualizing behavior. So why would it be okay to take any child to a cabaret? Why would it be okay, despite who it is doing the sexual activity? And then when you get into the fact that it's men wearing thongs, that adds a whole new layer of what are we normalizing in our culture? What are we normalizing for our children? Why is it that parents desire this? And given this is a select case in London and it may be a specific few that are seeking it out intentionally, and I guess all in all, I'm glad to hear that people are in opposition to it, because God help us if this becomes such a normalcy that we wouldn't cringe at the idea of it.
Yeah. And honestly, though, like I truly do think, and this is, I'll actually ask, Shara, if you're still in the chat. Well, first of all, is it Shara or Shara? Because I want to make sure that we pronounce your name right. But so go ahead and let us know. But beyond that, I wanted to ask, aside from what we've mentioned tonight, have you been aware of these type of performances popping up all over both the country and across seas? Because in my experience, many individuals are just not aware that this is happening. And I honestly think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we live in a fast-paced society. And I truly think that there are distractions that I think the enemy wants us to be distracted with. It's so easy. It's so easy for individuals to get off work and just check out. They want to see the latest Marvel movie, the latest Star Wars movie. They're just like fixated on, honestly, just being what many people have referred to being plugged into the Matrix, to use a pop culture reference. It's being so obsessed with the latest TV show or the latest activity to go do, the latest app, whatever the case may be, that so many people are just not aware of like these other things on the fringes of societies that are slowly becoming less and less fringe, more and more dominant. Because to be honest, 5 years ago, I think even some of these performances that we keep hearing about would not even be remotely accepted as normal. And yet here we are. We've talked about multiple of these on our podcast. And the only reason why we keep bringing them up is because they keep happening. And I think it's important to keep shedding a light on, because to some degree, someone has to sound the alarm that, hey, our culture is starting to normalize this. Hey, it's not just this one event here. It's, oh, hey, it popped up over here too. Oh, and over here. Oh, and next door, and unfortunately that is becoming a theme. But yeah, and Shara, you said that we got it right the first time. So awesome. And you hear about it. Yeah, I hear about it online. Drag queen story hour at libraries, drag shows for kids. I think in California. And see, that's exactly my point. Unfortunately, Shara, that is not just in California. It's in Texas. It's in Idaho. It's in Tennessee. I believe it's been in Georgia. I'm sure there are many other states. I'm just mentioning ones off the top of my head that I know for a fact they have held these events. And there's been multiple in all of those states I just listed. So unfortunately, I think that's another thing. Many more conservative individuals kind of think it's staying in California, and we like to say, don't California my Tennessee, or don't California my Idaho, or don't California my Arizona, or whatever the case may be. But it's already being exported at a alarming rate. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts about the whole Matrix analogy, Michael.
it's social conditioning, right? Like that's what the Matrix is all about anyway, is that, and what we're seeing here and why we can compare it to the Matrix is social conditioning. That if the voice you hear most often is normalizing behavior that no other voice would normalize, you'll still be accustomed to that behavior. And that's what's happening in this weird sexual revolution of a sorts that we've had over the past 10 years, specifically, of going from homosexuality being talked about in sitcoms, accepted largely. I mean, that goes back to early 90s, is a pretty common thing. And now we've gone from homosexuality being largely accepted to now it's being celebrated when we were young. And not only now is it being celebrated, but it's being forced upon our culture, forced upon individuals who are not interested. We've gone from saying, okay, you shouldn't probably beat up the gay kid at school, to now, if you're gay, you're better than the straight kid. And if you don't affirm and celebrate the gay kid, then you are the bully because you're not believing the way that we believe. And therefore, you need to be ostracized in our community.
Yeah.
And now that's not just gay kids like it may have been over the past few decades. Now it's getting to a point where if you're a heterosexual male child that was born as a male, then there's probably something wrong with you and you're part of the patriarchy, because you had the option to choose to be a female and you chose not to. You had the option to define yourself sexually in one way or another and you chose not to. And this is besides the patriarchy. It's a whole complex, and we could get into a deep dive on the conspiracy potential there, but ultimately there seems to be a staggering evidence that our culture is being incentivized to abandon ordinary sexual behavior.
Yeah.
At the same time that they're being conditioned to believe that having more than one child is selfish. At the same time that they're being forced to consume products that have a history now and a evidential basis of sterilization. And I'm not just talking about vaccinations. I'm talking about cleaning products. I'm talking about even consumptionary products that are being put into our foods. All in all, it seems to add up. And I don't like to be the conspiracy theorist, but I don't want to abandon evidence and empirical data either. And we have media telling us that we have to abandon unordinary sexual, or we have to accept unordinary sexual behavior. We should be shamed for having multiple children in a heterosexual relationship. And we should continue using products that are sterilizing us as a society, so that if we don't get euthanized, sterilized on our own means by a vasectomy or even by other contraceptive means, then we should be ostracized by that as well. And it's this weird, horrifying reality that we now live in. And it's not limited to American culture, clearly. Like London is having this going on for babies. It seems like there is great effort toward limiting our reproductive potential in society.
Yeah.
On an ideological front, on a physiological front. And I have a hard time believing that that is the intentional work of man. And I'm left with the thought that this is an act of the enemy, because we do battle against an enemy, and the accuser, the deceiver, Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him, is certainly at work. And there seems to be an agenda at play in our generation that is certainly not unique to our generation, but we need to have our eyes open. And it's scary. This is just a small part of the story that I think is very disturbing.
Yeah.
But it adds up to one huge equation, and we need to be in opposition to that because it's in opposition to Scripture, of the imperative that God has given us.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that you did a good job building out kind of the micro versus the macro. And yeah, I think that you're completely right on the agenda that, it's hard to want to say that it's all human agenda. You mentioned the enemy. I think it's kind of a bit of both, because obviously the enemy works through man, but um at the end of the day, I think it's these ideas are definitely not unique to our culture, and we now move from the timeline of, first it starts off with tolerance, and then it moves to acceptance, and then it moves to celebration, and then it moves to participation. And right now it feels like we are in the transition period between celebration and participation. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the reality where we find ourselves. And
I'd even say that with participation comes obligation. That it's not just enough to be accepting of the participation, but you have to participate. You have to be in favor of. Yeah, it's a disturbing reality. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Celebration. No, that's just really it. That's the celebration part that we're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
There's an entire month dedicated to Pride, which, I mean, I personally don't agree with the homosexual lifestyle, or, all the various new new sexual preferences that are now arising every single day. But even if you have that belief that you don't have an issue with that lifestyle, you have to admit it's odd that you would have an entire month dedicated to your sexual preferences and being prideful of that. Like, I don't know, like, to me, like, Black History Month makes way more sense to me than Pride Month. I just feel like it's slightly trying to elevate my sexual preferences is the exact same as Black Americans having been previously oppressed in our country, and wanting a month to basically acknowledge their pain, which, you could say that that's overblown if you want, whatever the case may be. Just either way, I think that conflation is just, I would be insulted if I was a Black American by that conflation, but that maybe I'm off on that, but